Hey guys, welcome to the system breakdown of Yair Rodriguez. He's a guy who I really enjoy because obviously as a Taekwondo fighter who's amazing at Jiu-Jitsu, it's a man after my own heart, right? Taekwondo and Jiu-Jitsu, who can't love that? I do also think that the way that he fights makes for exciting fights when you have a lot of dynamic kicking. Of course it's very exciting. And his Jiu-Jitsu game is also very exciting. He doesn't just kind of like lay in a position and hold it. He's very movement based and he does a lot of really great stuff. So I want to talk about today the systems that he uses and why he's able to be successful with his Taekwondo. And what I think is interesting is that he's a really good example of a lot of things that I've talked about in my system breakdowns and in my Nemean fight system of if you're going to be a kicking-based fighter into a more open rule set, here's a lot of the principles that you need to apply. And you'll see a lot of his boxes checked as you start talking about things that he does. So that being said, I want to start by saying that the first thing I want to talk about before I get into anything else is going to be defense and entries, okay? So defensively, let's talk about some boxes he checks on this. You'll see a lot of things that are very similar between what Israel Adesanya does and Wonderboy does. A lot of similar principles that he uses. So instead of being a system where it's very focused on just like absorbing damage like you'll see in a lot of Muay Thai style fighters, it's very based on footwork and head movement. Now you will see his hands come up as he retreats to defend. You know, you see this type of stuff, but that's not the majority of his defense. The majority of his defense is based on range management, footwork, and head movement, okay? Now, the head movement in particular, which you'll see a lot of, is as guys are throwing and they start putting pressure on him, when he has lost control of the range, what you're going to see is a lot of roll unders. And you see Izzy do this a lot, where it's a lot of roll unders and escaping out the back. You know, coming in here, rolling under, and popping out a corner. So you'll see a lot of that. He's not doing a lot of roll unders the way that Izzy does. He basically is doing one and stepping out. A lot of times he'll throw it in with a punch as well. As he rolls under, he throws this punch and he gets out. He might do a secondary punch, but really, he's just getting his head down, pop, pop, and getting back out. He's not lingering in that position, okay? Another thing that you're going to see a lot of from him, like I said, it's about distance management. So he uses a lot of tools that we're going to talk about later on to keep them at bay. But when they do move forward, you'll see a lot of like what Lyoto Machida used to do, what Wonderboy does, where as he gets pressured in, he'll circle a lot and he'll create a space. And sometimes he'll circle one or two times. You know, sometimes you'll see him doing this stuff where he breaks off when he starts feeling like he's getting backed up too much. Just like we talked about in Wonderboy's video. Hanging out here when he's against the cage, and then when they move, he cuts an angle so that he never gets backed up too much. He'll retreat, but he'll never get backed into the wall and let them just cut off the cage on him. And those are tactics that work really well. Now, what you'll see a lot of from him is you'll see a lot of these rollbacks, and he'll throw up his hands while he does this as he steps back if they start blitzing and putting too much pressure on him. But like I said, this is all footwork, using range control, rolling out, and breaking a corner if he runs into trouble. Very similar to what you see in your Wonder Boys and Israel Adesanyas, okay? So that's the defense. Now, let's talk about entries into range. Now, when you talk about entering into range, there's a couple things I want to mention. First of all, at the beginning end of the round, you see some very dynamic stuff going on. At the end of the round, and you'll see this out of guys like John Jones, where the last 10 seconds you hear that chop, chop, chop. This is when you start seeing him throw very aggressive techniques. This is when you start seeing, you know, the flying roundhouse kicks. You know, this is when you start seeing him backing over and hitting that flip kick. I'm not going to do it. But you'll see very dynamic attacks at him because it's the end of the round. He doesn't care. What happens? He falls. Oh, okay. Round's over. By the time they get a chance to do anything. And in the meantime, there's a high chance that he might knock this guy out at the end of the round. It's a nice way of punctuating a round. So if you are an MMA guy, do this stuff. Like, use the fact that there's a round limit and take advantage of the fact that it's 10 seconds, throw something wild and crazy, and see if you knock the guy out. Particularly a dynamic kicking technique, because a lot of guys are not prepared for that. Now, at the beginning of the round, he does it for a very similar reason, and it's to break expectations. Look at like Jorge Masvidal versus Ben Askren. Part of the reason that technique worked is he just ran out and did it. And Ben Askren, he went to come underneath and defend it, and he got caught. And in the same way, you'll see a lot of this type of stuff where at the beginning of the round, you know, a lot of fighters are used to tapping gloves and starting to go to work here, right? He comes out here, he's throwing that turning wheel kick. Coming out here, throwing that tornado kick right off the bat, right? Stuff like this. Very dynamic attacks right off the bat because he knows that there is a high probability that you can land it. Now, it doesn't have to be anything as dynamic as that for you, but when you start your matches, don't always kind of get in this thing of, okay, time to work. Sometimes it's okay to and just catch them right off the bat. Let them walk into an axe kick or a front kick, right? Push them forward and be aggressive with your kicking. Then after you do a couple of really dynamic attacks and really like put pressure on them where they're kind of running away a little bit, once you feel them start to reset, then you go, okay, now we do this type of stuff that normally people do at the beginning of a round. It's a very useful strategy when you talk about sparring or fighting. It's good to come out aggressive with a lot of dynamic attacks at the beginning. Because you also got to keep in mind, a lot of guys are not used to this type of dynamic kicking. So when you talk about a turning wheel kick, when you talk about a tornado kick or a flying roundhouse kick, man, guys just don't know how to handle that because they're not used to it. That type of changeup, unless they have a strong kicking background like in Taekwondo, like Yair Rodriguez does, man, they're going to be in for a lot of trouble. If you do it to a guy like me, it's probably not going to work, right? I'm going to evade out and counter and stuff like that because I'm used to it. But even still, sometimes, even a guy like me, if you come in very aggressive, I'm not ready for that because I'm expecting the normal pace of, right? And taking a couple seconds to measure each other out before we attack. So that's a really useful tip. Now, as far as entry, a couple things I want to talk about. First of all is feinting. He predominantly uses one type of feint. Well, there's two types of feints I want to kind of talk about actually because the second one is a stance switch and we'll talk about that in a second. But really his primary feint is you'll see him do this, right? And what he does is the reason he does this stomp feint, real aggressive, you'll see him really stomp that floor, is the first time he does it, guys do this because they know that kick's coming. The second time he does it, they do this. The third time, they're like, whatever, he's just stomping the ground, he's not going to do anything. But then he goes, and he attacks real aggressively off of that stomp because guys just stop and they're going, well, the stomp, whatever, I don't have to do anything because he's not attacking, he's just feinting. He's tricking them into believing that that feint doesn't mean anything, when in fact that feint is a setup for an attack. But what it's doing is just creating a response where it's making them discount it. So it makes his first step not mean anything. And it kind of takes the telegraph off of it in the same way that what feinting is designed to do is give you false positives to the point where you discount them. You know, when we talk about the Nemean fight system, we talk about, you know, step jab, step side kick. Oh, you know, feint the roundhouse kick. All this stuff, it's like feinting, right? It's constantly active to make your system kind of go into overload. Izzy's the best at it, right? You see a lot of this. And by the time that shot comes, you kind of discounted it, okay? And that's what the step feint is designed for. Right? Very, very useful to throw this a couple times, get a reaction, and then when they stop reacting, then you use this to spring into something else. Now, as far as switching stance, a lot of stance switching, you know, you hear guys like Icy Mike talk about how stance switching, it doesn't really do anything. I'm here to tell you, if you're good at stance switching and if you're good at an ambidextrous system like Taekwondo, it absolutely does work. And it's not the stance switch that throws people off. It's not me going, oh, I've got you now, right? That's not what throws people off. You know, Kamaru Usman, when he does it, it doesn't really serve a purpose. He's throwing his, you know, punching, and they switch his stance, and they're like, well, you're not giving me anything that much different. But when you talk about guys like Israel Adesanya, when you talk about guys like Yair Rodriguez, it absolutely does, because what makes the difference is how they attack off of it. Israel Adesanya, it's a lot of like here, you know, pow, 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 right? That stance switch in conjunction with that attack, it makes them feel like something different is coming, and it throws them off. With Yair Rodriguez, it's the same thing with his kicking. Whereas he's here, he's getting you used to throwing and defending these kicks, and then he switches stance, and he can kick off that back leg, and it does a different effect, okay? Same thing with like a roundhouse kick. Like I'm here, bam, he's throwing to that back corner. Okay. And you start using it as part of mixing up your attacks. So that flying roundhouse, you know, I just did a couple front leg kicks. I did a rear leg kick. Now I'm gonna feint the other side and then come back to it. And this stuff throws people off. And a lot of active stance switching when you're fighting can mess people up. Another aspect of this is that I think he fools people into believing that he likes to kick from his right and punch from his left. Daniel Cormier talks about this in his Jeremy Stevens fight. He goes, look, every time he goes to his right foot, he likes to throw kicking off his right foot. And every time he goes to his left, he likes to box. Until he doesn't. Now, I think what he's doing is this. When he goes right foot forward, I agree, the majority of his attacks seem to be kicking based. When he goes left foot forward, he seems to prefer his punching at this point and focus more on punching. But he's not limited to it. And you'll see him go from here and go to his kicking side and get real active with the jab, right? Start throwing these, what I call them hook straights, because they're a little bit more hooked at the end, where they circle. They're not a true straight where you do like a classic boxing jab. He just pop, pop. He throws a lot of that type of stuff. But he throws this from his right foot forward because guys are convinced that right foot forward means something. But it doesn't with a guy like that. He's very comfortable throwing anything off of either side. Now, there's guys like Wonder Boy who certainly prefer to throw things like their turning wheel kick off of the left foot forward because they want to throw with the right foot. I don't think he's that limited. His Taekwondo is advanced enough. He can just as easily throw this technique off of either side and feel totally comfortable, okay? So stance switching is kind of an entry tactic and feint in itself, okay? The other things I want to talk about as far as entries is the importance of a good jab and that lead leg kicking, okay? When we talk about the Nemean fight system, for those of you who have been watching that, one of the things you'll see I talk about a lot is the majority of your attacks should be lead side attacks. Jab, side kick, roundhouse kick, right? Jab, side kick, roundhouse. Jab, side kick, roundhouse. I talk about this a lot. He does exactly that. From either side, he leads kick into the leg, active jab, side kick, roundhouse kick. Very, very active with these techniques. Now, part of the reason he does this is it keeps them at bay, and it backs them up, and it frustrates them. When every time somebody walks into my range, I'm chopping away, and I'm planting side kicks, I'm planting roundhouse kicks on his leg, I'm constantly active with the jab, he eats a jab every time he comes in, it slows down their ability to pressure me, and that's what he wants. He wants pressure, but he doesn't want a lot of pressure. He wants to limit the ability for them to move into techniques, and every time they do, he's going to chop away at them. So this is an important part of entering into range, that from right here, he starts picking away at him using the jab, the lead inside or outside leg kick, depending on which stance he's in, and that front leg side kick. As opposed to Wonder Boy, who puts a lot of the side kicks on the body, Yair Rodriguez prefers the thigh. I like to use both. I think there's a lot of benefit to both. As guys walk in here, as you catch that thigh, one, it wears down their legs, but two, it's frustrating when every time I walk in, if this happens. And he does this a lot to guys. He also does this when guys put a lot of pressure on it, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the next segment we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about what he does when he backs guys up or they stay in place, and we're going to talk about what he does when they're pressuring forward on him, because I think that he fights differently out of both of these scenarios, and there's some crossover, of course, but I think that it's important to kind of distinguish because he does change the way he fights. So stay tuned, and let's get right into what he does when he backs guys up. Okay, guys, so one of the things that you're going to see a lot out of him is when he starts pushing guys back or when guys stop their motion, this gives him a lot of opportunities for striking to sort of pick them apart, but he also has to be very cautious in how he enters. You know, we talked about he uses a lot of stopping techniques and using that stomp and stuff like that, and what it does is it causes guys to kind of stop in their tracks sometimes, or guys aren't sure if they want to keep pressuring forward because maybe they've been eating some shots and they're kind of rethinking their strategy. You saw this a lot in fights with like George St. Pierre when he fought. When GSP used to fight, he would catch him with that jab and get back out, and every time they entered, they knew they were at risk of getting sprawled or shot on. So they could never feel comfortable entering on him. And it's the same thing with Yair Rodriguez, where when they start pressuring him, they eat a lot of shots. And we'll talk about what he does in a minute on that, but what happens sometimes is between that, him stomping on his foot, feinting, stuff like that, sometimes guys will just stop and go, hold on, let's chill out and figure out what we're going to do. Or they'll start backing up. When this happens, he has to be careful how he enters. And this is a time to kind of go big or go home in his mind. Now, when you attack somebody who knows that you're coming and they're waiting for the countering, you have to be very strategic in how you enter, because otherwise they're going to counter you and pick you apart. You got to be really careful if you get a guy who's a good counter striker. And he knows this. So what does he do? one of the things he does is he gets very dynamic at that point. This is where you see the most out of his like very dynamic attacks. This is when you see him going for axe kicks. This is when you see him going for the turning wheel kick a lot. This is when you see the flying roundhouse kicks a lot. This is when you see, you know, the tornado kicks here. All this stuff becomes very prevalent at this point because it mixes up his attacks. And like I said, he'll do it off of both sides. I'm just doing one side to show because the Bob's facing this way. But he will absolutely do his tornado kicks on both sides because he knows he's good at it. So these kind of attacks guys are not used to. And while they're waiting for that strong, you know, that boxing to come at them or that rear leg roundhouse, all of a sudden they have something big coming at them and they're going, holy crap. And he backs him up and then he starts really tearing him apart with this type of stuff. This is when like he gets him back to the cage and you start seeing flying knee strikes and stuff like that coming at him. Because now they're in danger and he's still mixing it up so they can't deal with it. So that's one thing he'll do. Another thing he'll do is a lot of elevation changes. He also likes to attack this rear side of the body a lot. And he does a couple things to kind of help him with this. First of all, secondary attacks are a really important part of this game for him. When he does, whether it's a big attack like we were just talking about, or a regular attack, you'll see a lot of follow-ups with either a same side punch or another roundhouse kick. So what he'll do is this. And this is something that if you're going to kick to the body, you absolutely need to do anyway. Follow all your punches with a same side punch. You'll see him do this here. One, there's a high success rate on landing them. When I kick to your leg, and you're defending the leg kick, guys drop their hands and they get hit a lot. He is very successful at landing on this attack in particular. He did it to Korean Zombie a lot. He did it to Jeremy Stevens a lot. He's done it to everybody. Guys start to defend low and they get hit high. And this elevation change is a big part of it. And one of the ways he does that is with following his punches or following his kicks with a punch of the same side. This also helps him defend against getting his kicks caught because he's had guys catch his kick and because he's already moving in that punch, they don't have time to really hold on to it because they're busy getting hit in the face. This is a tactic if you are a strong kicker, you need to be implementing anyway, that anytime you kick to the body, you need to be following it with a punch. On a quick side note, the other thing that you'll see him do a lot is when guys start catching this foot here, you'll see him pull back and strike. I talked about this in my video for like what to do if somebody catches your kick. This is one of the tactics you can use. So if he comes in here and he throws this side kick and guys start pulling up the foot, you'll see him do this, but he pushes off with it. So he comes in here and he draws back and he pushes back to create space and get his foot free. He's very good at this. I've seen him do it a bunch of times. But the majority of his kick catching defense is, like I said, following it up here, okay? Now, as far as elevation changes, this is a really big part of his game. So first of all, I've talked about this rear side of the body a lot. He does this for the same reason Lyoto Machida does. It works. He lands a lot on it, and it creates a reaction out of him. So first of all, he's very powerful with it. And going back to Jeremy Stevens, he's dropped him flat out with this. And he's done this to a couple guys where he catches him with the roundhouse, and you'll see them collapse because he's good at hitting that liver with it. Right under the elbow, man, he's brutal with it. And he will drop guys. And so they fear and respect it. Because it's such a powerful kick, it then makes him free to do other things. So see him throw that a couple times, and when they start dropping down and defend it, he comes up, and that's when he goes high. He does the same thing with that front leg side kick. He'll throw that front leg side kick to the leg a couple times, and then you'll see him go to the head kick and try to go high with it. And this is another one that guys start doing this, and this is what makes it possible. As you start lowering guys down, kick into the body, kick into the leg, guys start anticipating it, and then you can catch them much easier with the head kicks, okay? So that is a big part of it. Like I said, a lot of elevation changes, a lot of kick into the body, following up these techniques. The other thing that he'll do is follow up techniques with roundhouse kicks. So you'll see this a lot, where he'll throw that turning wheel kick and immediately come into like a leg kick or something like that. He'll throw his side kick and immediately follow with the roundhouse kick. A lot of his techniques, he punctuates with a roundhouse kick. And this is something I always recommend. Punctuating techniques with a roundhouse kick is a nice way of, one, turning one-offs into combinations, and two, to punctuate combinations very nicely. You can get a lot of head kick finishes because as guys are used to defending one thing, all of a sudden they get caught with another. And you'll see him do this on stuff like, he'll throw his tornado kick and throw a roundhouse kick to punctuate it and catch people with that second kick. So the first kick is really just a setup for that roundhouse, okay? So that about does it for entries. The next part we're going to talk about what to do when they start backing him up. All right, so stay tuned. Okay guys, so now we're going to talk about what he does when he gets pressured back, which is the majority of how he fights, to be totally honest. And honestly, I kind of think he prefers it. You know, when you see him putting pressure on somebody else and they start backing up, you see a lot of him kind of waiting, and you see a lot of this circle and waiting to kind of wait for that right moment to attack, but he's very apprehensive when he goes forward and pressures offensively. Countering, he doesn't have that problem. I think he kind of likes it when guys move him back. He seems to prefer to fight backwards, which is a big advantage because what most people do against a strong kicker is move him backwards. So I don't know if it's a preference or just he's more used to it because that's what guys do. When they deal with somebody who's a good kicker, they want to come forward to press past that range and start kind of putting it on him. So he's used to that, and he has tools for dealing with that. So this is an important aspect of this system. The first thing is lateral techniques. Whenever you get a guy who is pushing forward a lot and you're a kicker, this is where, you know, we talked about that side kick, but even things like front kick and stuff like that, you know, you're going to see a lot of side kicks, front kicks, but even punching. This is where you see the effectiveness of the jab, or what I call those hook straights, where they're kind of like, they're not really straights, but they're not really hooks, where he just kind of starts throwing this type of stuff. Where it's just kind of like he gets his head down and starts putting it up there. That type of stuff is really effective at keeping people at bay so they're afraid to enter range and so that they get backed up whenever they enter range. Now, like I said before, if they start pressuring forward a lot, it's a lot of circling and taking his moment. And what he does is he waits for them to come forward and he presses in and then he counters in. He comes back and uses that to spring forward. This is a very Taekwondo tactic. Like we talked about Wonder Boy, who does this a lot, right, and springs off of it. He does the same thing off of this backward motion and uses it to spring into his technique. This is great because it gives him more power, and it also simultaneously, it's more dynamic, it's harder for them to deal with. So as they think they're backing him up, he's coming forward into that technique. And he does this with all sorts of techniques here, and he counters into that kick, right? He comes back and counters into his punching. And in the same way that guys like Conor McGregor are really good at this, where they back up, pop. That's a technique that Conor McGregor is very well known for. Dustin Poirier is really known for this. That type of a tactic of moving back and catching them as I can circle back into this is very, very useful. Another thing he's really good at is being aware of the right technique at the right range. He's probably better at this than almost anybody else. You know, from the outside range, he's using a lot of these big kicks. When he's really far out, you see him use a lot of circling big techniques. This is where you see the wheel kicks more. When he gets a little bit closer, this is when you see his lateral techniques, the techniques that can reach them really well. When he gets a little bit closer, it's a lot of using his jab, using that hook straight cross man. I need to come up with a better term because it's not really a cross because he circles it at the end. It's almost like a reverse bottom fist. And he's almost just kind of like this with it. So I guess we'll keep calling them hook straights. If you have a better term for it, throw it in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. So he does this from this range. And as they get close, this is when you start seeing those really famous elbows that he's really known for. Stepping through, spinning elbows. What he did against Korean Zombie, where the guy came in and he pressured forward and he came in with this elbow and pop, right up to the Korean Zombie's head, knocked him out at the very last second of the round. It was beautiful, right? He's very good at range awareness with this stuff. Knee strikes is another one. When he feels like he can't move back very well, he switches and he starts throwing a knee strike and then disengaging. He gives them a powerful close range shot from A range, then he gets back to the range he wants to be at. So range awareness and using the right technique from the right space is very important because range is a big part of his system. Let's see. Like I said, he's using a lot of lateral techniques, a lot of stepping back, keeping him at bay. Keeping at bay anyway, just using that front side kick a lot, that alone is going to stop them from doing a lot of forward pressure. That's why he does it so much. Same thing with chopping away at the leg. It's part of why he does it so much, because he knows that as he starts to put something into their leg, it's going to stop them from coming forward a lot when they keep having this happen. And you see him drop guys in fights from those leg kicks. When they put a lot of forward pressure on, like I said, you'll see a lot of the rolling under and popping out a back corner. You'll see this used in conjunction with an overhand punch. Like this is where we start seeing pop, pop, pop. and popping out the back corner, right? So it's bah, bah, and sliding out. He doesn't linger there, but he drops his head down, rolls, throws that big overhand punch, and pops out. Very, very important tactic when he gets pressured too much. Like I said, you'll see a lot of this stuff. When he gets backed up to the cage, he's very good at working off the cage. You'll see a lot of 2-on-1 wrist control and popping out of corner, a lot of framing and popping out of corner. He's very good at not staying against the cage. He can fight there, but he prefers not to. He also has some really great takedowns. Man, his wrestling and his judo is fantastic. And he knows the importance of this to keep the fight where he wants it. So, man, he does I want to say it's a Harai Goshi at one point. Can't remember who it was. Was it Feely? I don't remember. But he gets him. He gets that, head control, steps through, and does that Harai Goshi. Gets a beautiful takedown. Man, he's very, very good at this type of stuff. His wrestling is fantastic. And this leads me into my next one. When he gets pressured a lot, and this one I know was against Feely, is he goes for that that blast double. He's got a great takedown, but he saves it, and he knows not to overuse it. And he waits till he gets pressured too much, and he comes underneath, and he drives him back to the center of the ring and takes him down. Very, very nice stuff. Great reactive shots, great use of the reactive blast double. Other than that, like I said, when he gets pressured too much, you'll start to see him step through, doing these, spinning elbows, spinning back fist, doing that, Korean zombie elbow. I guess that's the best term for it. That type of stuff is really, really in his skill set. He's very good at doing that. So when he gets backed up, like I said, he's very comfortable springing off and throwing these counter kicks and just keeping his range. And like I said, if he starts to pressure too much, he disengages, and you'll see him do this in reset. And some guys who watch MMA don't like it because they don't understand what's going on, but that is a tactical reason to disengage. John Jones does this all the time, and he catches flack for it because he runs away because he wants to control the range and be on his terms. This is a good example of that. He wants to fight from out here. He doesn't want to fight from here. This isn't where he's strongest. He knows their boxing is better than his, so why would he fight there? So when he gets stuck there, no, it's cool. And you'll see him sometimes run around a whole bunch until eventually that guy stops and he resets to where he wants to be and starts picking him apart again. Okay? So that does it for when he's moving backward. Last part of this, we're going to talk briefly on his jiu-jitsu stuff. Not a lot to cover on this, but I mean, it's really excellent stuff, so I want to at least pay attention to it a little bit. Okay? Okay, guys, so for the last part, I want to talk about the jiu-jitsu game that he likes to use. Very, very important stuff because when you have a strong Taekwondo game and you have it in conjunction with a strong Jiu-Jitsu game, it makes you way more free to kick and it makes you dangerous from everywhere. You look at a guy like Charles Oliveira, who in a lot of ways is very similar stylistically. He's just kind of a little bit more Jiu-Jitsu, less Taekwondo, whereas Yair Rodriguez is more Taekwondo, a little bit less Jiu-Jitsu. But both are excellent at both. And what Yair Rodriguez does is he just kind of picks him apart, and if he gets driven back to the cage, he'll pull guard, he'll win in scrambles, he gets a lot of takedowns himself because he's got excellent wrestling, and then he beats him on the bottom. And he's very, very good on the bottom. The only guy he ever had any problems with was Frankie Edgar. But Frankie Edgar's a monster in wrestling, so he just kind of got out-wrestled there. But for the most part, man, he really does win from the bottom for the most part. He's very, very dangerous from there. And what he does is he uses a strategy where if you're going to do jiu-jitsu for MMA or self-defense, you should really pay attention to guys like him and Charles Oliveira because they both do something similar. They're going to use their feet to back you up, and as you start pressuring forward to stack and drop into them, they open their feet and let you fall into a triangle. And, Yair is very good at doing this and letting them fall into the triangle and cinching it up nice and tight, and it's very hard to escape. And if you do, so what? He doesn't care because his side control escapes are fantastic. He's very good at creating space, recovering guard, rolling out of it, doing the things he needs to do. Like I said, with the exception of Frankie Edgar, I think he's the only guy who's ever held him down. But that's because Frankie Edgar is really fantastic at that. That's his game. And he fought perfectly against Yair. Like, Yair's a tough nut to crack, and Frankie Edgar was the right guy to crack it. He was the nutcracker. But for the most part, when, Yair's on the bottom, he's very good at attacking leg locks and attacking triangles. And when those fail, it's elbow city, right? You'll start seeing him throwing bottom fists. You'll start seeing him throw elbows. He had an early fight against a guy, I can't remember his name. It was like his first fight in the UFC after The Ultimate Fighter when he fought this guy who's a jiu-jitsu brown belt. I can't remember his name now, but he got into like a 50-50 position, brought his other leg around the head and kind of had him so that he couldn't advance on. And while the guy was trying to stop bombs, he controlled the wrist, started throwing his own bottom fist, and when the guy put his head down, he was dropping elbows, and he ended up winning that exchange that he should have lost because he was just being more aggressive with his striking. And he has very, very good striking from the bottom. And I think that if you are a jiu-jitsu guy, you need to spend the time to learn how to strike in your jiu-jitsu, both from the top and bottom. And I don't know why guys don't spend any time on it. I try to learn as much of it as I can. But, you know, if you're just a sport guy, that's okay too, I guess. But if you're interested in learning like self-defense side of it, yeah, you should spend some time learning how to strike from these positions because it's a game changer. When you get a guy who stacks you, if you don't know how to handle that, like you're in serious trouble. But if you let them fall into a triangle, and if they stack, if you pull them into these elbow strikes and stuff, you can win these exchanges and do a lot of damage to a guy and win a fight striking from the bottom. So it's a very important skill set. But the biggest lesson I would say is, look, you got to look at a guy like this, or at the very least study the methods used by guys like Wonder Boy or Israel Adesanya, what he did to Paul Vittoria in his last fight. You know, his last fight against Vittoria was a really great example where he kept getting back to his feet, right? And every time Vittoria took him down, Adesanya was back on his feet because he had been working that type of stuff. And if you're going to be a good striker, you got to at least be able to get back to your feet. But ideally, if you can win in jiu-jitsu, do it, right? So this is why this combination is very, very useful. So it's why I like Yair Rodriguez a lot. I'm excited to see him back after a 2-year gap and see what he's going to bring to the table when he fights Max Holloway. This is a fight that originally I had started studying him for the pre-fight analysis for that fight, but I was having so much fun with him because he's such a fun fighter that I started getting deeper and did a full system breakdown. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure you're throwing in the comments what you think, who you'd like to see me cover next, and if there's things that you think that I didn't cover that you think you'd like to see me add in, please make sure you mention it as well because I'm not perfect. I don't get it all, but I'd love to get your feedback as well about what you think for him and where you think he's going to go. Because I'll be honest, at 28 years old, he hasn't even hit his prime yet. This is a guy that I think in 4 years you're going to start talking about him as the champion or the #1 contender and start talking about him in those terms. Whereas right now, you're not really sure where he's at because he's been out for a couple of years. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.